God, I mean, I will, for the sake of the argument that we're having right now, that could totally plausibly be a thing.
I would like to grant you the opportunity to retract your positions, or I will be forced to embarrass you.
I have to laugh at that part, at the idea that he's granting me the opportunity to retract my statements or be destroyed.
Dude, you obviously don't actually research any of this stuff. It's fascinating to me that you have this many people that follow you and your level of knowledge is so low, and you're sitting there spewing these talking points that are so debunked. It's mind-bending.
So, no, I don't retract my statements. I stand firm behind the idea that as far as the context that you're putting DNA in right now, DNA is not a code. It's not a code like computer code. It's not a code like anything that you're trying to say.
I think the core idea behind synthetic biology is that biology is fundamentally programmable because it runs on digital code in the form of DNA. And we can read that code with DNA sequencing. We can write that code with DNA synthesis or DNA printing. And if you can read and write code and you have a machine that'll run it, which is sort of how we saw a cell, that's programming, right? And you could ask, oh, you know, how expensive is this? How reliable, Jason, is it to program cells? Those are fair questions. But is biology fundamentally programmable? The answer is yes. That's inarguable because it runs on code that we can read and write, all right?
But it is not a code. It's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's an acid. I don't understand why you think it's a code. DNA is no more of a code than Diet Coke and regular Coke.
Genes, which from my point of view are absolutely central to biology, genes are information. They're coded information. It even looks like computer information. I mean, a chromosome is a great long computer tape. It's linear, it runs one-dimensional, digital code. It's not binary, it's quaternary, but apart from that, it's just the same as computer tape. It's read in sequence. It's copied and pasted from one part of the organism to another in just the same way as a computer programmer would copy and paste. So biology has turned into computer science.
It's purely a chemical reaction that happens, and the byproducts of that chemical reaction are amino acids. So I'm not afraid of you responding and like embarrassing me on my ignorance or my lack of knowledge that you say. I mean, you're trying to puff up really big there, bud. I've been around. I've been in this game for a while now. Your fucking Nintendo hat doesn't scare me, okay, buddy?
I would like to grant you the opportunity to retract your positions, or I will be forced to embarrass you.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight has multiple aspects of significance to me personally. August 9th in the year of our Lord 2020 is both my 36th birthday and the date which marks having lived 50% of my life here in the United States and 50% in the place of my birth, the United Kingdom. It also marks facing off against the very first atheist who came after me personally since I started engaging in YouTube apologetics when he supposedly debunked one of my videos. Now, in that light, let this day stand as a line of demarcation for me and to all those who meet me in the future, whether it be in person or in the digital ring of debate in which we are currently engaged. From henceforth, there will be no quarter given to the enemies of our Creator, nor those who refuse to look beyond the pathetic talking points spewed by my opponent and those like him. The verbal weapons you wield are broken. Your arguments are juvenile and lacking in substance. The more I engage with atheists, the more I realize you are mental children desperate to avoid the obvious. That the dogma of naturalism and its foundation of Darwinian evolution is nothing but a cloud of smoke which is decimated by the wind of rational thought and logical analysis. We are told that evolution is a settled and proven science, yet its very foundation is based upon the assumption that information can come from nothing. If this is so, why then does all modern science prove beyond doubt that life cannot reproduce without the genetic code housed in our DNA? In any other context, a person would be considered insane to insist that a language of any kind, spoken or written, could form without consciousness and intellect being required. I ask you, would any rational person argue the numerous languages used for the software and design of hardware required for this debate? Could they possibly somehow spring into existence by chance? Without intelligence and logic, can any of these concepts be devised? I would say no, but I shall let the words of my opponent address this question. I leave the determination of his rationality to you, the audience.
This brings me to what my next video will explain in much more detail, and that is the genetic code, and more importantly, the information it contains. Atheists desperately attempt to avoid the premise that it actually contains real information and is not just purely deterministic chemical reactions.
I mean, it is just chemical reactions. Like I said at the beginning of this, DNA can be interpreted as a code, but that does not make it inherently a code. We can determine certain sequences, and we can know the effect of those sequences on the rest of the organism, or on certain biomechanical operations or chemical interactions within an organism. Like, we can determine those things. Just because we can determine sequences in DNA does not mean that it inherently contains code, though.
DNA it's an identical process to computer codes. And it's very interesting that, you know, ideas about computers developed early in the 20th century, and, you know, Claude Shannon comes along in 1948.
But it is not a code, it's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's an acid. I don't understand why you think it's a code. DNA is no more of a code than Diet Coke and regular Coke.
There needs to be no question that communication theory applies to biology. Okay? All of these concepts can be applied to DNA.
Is that debated anywhere?
Only among people who are ignorant, frankly. Okay? People in the know do not debate this fact.
But not in this credible scientific community. This is well understood.
There is no credible scientific argument to try to say that applying communication theory to biology is somehow inappropriate. Yeah. There's hundreds of scientific papers that go very deep into the subject, and so, no, there's...
And again, the only people that have ever mentioned this or ever said this or ever expect this are creationists, just like you.
I'm talking at the moment with Perry Marshall and Kevin Ham. Perry Marshall is from Chicago in the United States, and Kevin Ham is from Vancouver in Canada, and we have just taken part in the United Kingdom launch of a huge prize to be won by anybody who can produce the genetic code or a genetic code via natural process generating it itself. Mm-hmm. Perry, have I got that right, first of all?
That's right. Any code, any encoding, message decoding system that can come out of an emergent property from chemicals to code would qualify. Yes. And I think it's one of the most fundamental questions in all of science. And it just hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves.
That's right, it hasn't. And I think that's partly why we've been highlighting it in the meeting that we've just had here at the Royal Society in London. You can't get much more prestigious than that, can you?
No, it's
by the way.
It's delightful.
Yes. Now, question perhaps also to Kevin, does it really need to be 10 million? You know, I'm a scientist. To me, that's a huge sum of money.
But it is not a code, it's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's an acid. I don't understand why you think it's a code. DNA is no more of a code than Diet Coke and regular Coke.
Damn, dude, there's 10 million on the line for this one. I guess you just need to fly over to Oxford, go meet up with the Royal Society, and tell them how they've been completely duped on this entire premise of the genetic code actually being a real code, and that they don't need to be remotely associated with it because it could completely decimate their credibility as academics.
In the information age we currently enjoy, to me it's a completely implausible concept to conclude that HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, WordPress, apps, or any of the other aspects of technology that utilize software, that they could possibly come into existence without programmers and designers being required.
I agree, that would be crazy to assert, but luckily that's not what we're asserting. That's not what anybody's asserting here. It's only you that's claiming that evolution would entail this. So you're basically building a straw man argument against people that already accept evolution and are misrepresenting their arguments for evolution. You see, the biggest difference here is that we have natural explanations for like why DNA looks the way that it does, why it operates the way that it does, and why the diversity of life that we have here on Earth exists. We have natural explanations for why these things happen. We don't have explanation for why like PHP exists, other than somebody designed it. So what you're really doing here is you're comparing bananas to horses here. So let me give you a good example of how this of a code that arises naturally, right? Take bumblebees for example.
Now, while it continues to fascinate me that people such as Godless Engineer continue to make these same assertions, I'm just going to pull up a few papers real quick and scroll through them on how the genetic code, it's a universal enigma from Eugene Koonin. I mean, he's a very high level, actually an atheist, but he admits that there's a code and it's a major conundrum for origin of life. We've got things like dual syntax. I'm pretty sure that syntax is a component of coding and programming. Go figure. Apparently that doesn't exist, but here's evidence that it does. And then here we can really get into some fun stuff where not only is the genetic code have its own programming logic, translational pausing is a subset syntax and code base, which enables a dual control of, from a timing perspective, we're talking about 3D printing logic rules that are executed through the ribosome through the dual syntax in the genetic code that supposedly isn't a code, even though it houses all sorts of controls, including space and time, which I think is just fascinating. And then you go over into, here's another paper on how computational theory applies to genetics. I mean, you can just go on and on and on with all these different pieces, and you get into information. And here's some interesting stuff about prescriptive information and formal information and how it requires forethought and logic in order for the ciphers and the algorithms to be executed. But according to my opponent, none of this stuff actually exists. Like, do you not comprehend this?
There's just no logical, plausible, and probable conclusion you can reach that says binary code will magically transform into syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and all the other if, then, and else logic rules that are required for any type of programming to actually work.
And again, the only people that have ever mentioned this or ever said this or ever expect this are creationists, just like you.
This is the reason why I love biology, though. Biology is self-assembling nanotechnology with a built-in programming language. No other nanotechnology has this. This is really important.
If you have a piece of iron, is it remotely plausible that without a grindstone, that piece of iron is going to turn into a sword? And without a fire?
This has no bearing
It does.
on
Answer the
what we're
question.
talking about.
It does. Answer the question.
Here, let me give you. Hold on. Let me. You asked me a question. Let me actually finish answering. Okay, John. All right. So let me give you a good example of how this of a code that arises naturally, right? Take bumblebees for example.
Okay, so you're trying to resort to evolutionary signal theory, and which is quite honestly one of the stupidest arguments that evolutionists and atheists try to make, because it requires a completed pre-existing system. Like, do you not comprehend this?
Well, okay. Well, I mean, I asked the question first, so how about you just oblige me, and then maybe I can oblige you. Can you explain the word decimated for me?
You question my knowledge of coding. So, if you're writing a what is your background? You say you're an engineer. What is your background with coding?
If you're not going to allow me to answer the question, I'm not going to answer further questions. Do you understand me, John? This is an adult conversation.
Yeah, and you're dropping insults, so you can't back up.
I've just come away from the opening figuring out that you don't like me so much, it seems, as far as my response to you. I guess when you ask me, can codes, as far as we understand them, be generated naturally? Obviously, they can.
I'll put a dare on you. Would you have the CO Jones to go out on camera and literally tell people that PHP invented itself?
No, I wouldn't. But here,
no,
let me
no,
give you. Hold on. Let me. You asked me a question. Let me actually finish answering. Okay, John. All right.
If you don't think I made an argument against evolutionary theory, then I'm guessing you just are ignorant about evolutionary theory. Is that? I mean,
What I actually asked you to do was differentiate cause and effect from if then.
if then literally is a cause and effect. And
Well, that's precisely my point.
no, hang on. And it requires if-thens require foreknowledge of the intended outcome. Correct?
I don't understand that bit. I also don't understand, but it seems to me that you just don't seem to really understand like logic gates as far as like coding and coding standards really go.
You just said I don't understand them. So debunk what I just said. Because because if you want to continue down this rabbit hole, I will happily pull up.
Well, I mean, you're just baselessly.
So are you gonna make me pull up a paper and like prove it to you?
What?
You gonna make me pull up a paper and prove it to you right now? Okay, so are you now, number one, are you admitting that there is a code?
DNA can be interpreted as a
I
code.
don't know, is it literal or figurative? Dude, you obviously don't actually research any of this stuff. It's fascinating to me that you have this many people that follow you and your level of knowledge is so low, and you're sitting there spewing these talking points that are so debunked. It's mind-bending.
But it's ultimately a chemical that goes through different chemical reactions, different processes.
So were you paying attention at all during my opening?
I mean, yes, I've been paying attention to you.
Okay. So are you suggesting that you should fly over to the Royal Society and tell them that's not a literal code?
I would still appreciate you not, doing questions like that.
You insulted my knowledge of coding.
Well, that's not exactly dropping like personal insults against you, which I think is.
Well, given the fact I owned a software development company and worked in multiple tech startups, yeah, I think I know a little something about this. So, what is your background, sir?
I didn't know that.
There is no chemical reaction between the codon and the amino acid. It is literally being read. This is a recognized premise in biology, in cellular biology, information theory, that there is literally a read of data being executed by the ribosome. There is no chemical reaction. So to argue that it is nothing but cause and effect, chemistry is absolutely eviscerated at the fundamental of the creation of a protein. There is no chemical reaction between them.
It's ultimately a chemical that goes through different chemical reactions, different processes.
There is no chemical reaction. This is a well-recognized premise.
It would behoove you not to strawman me or to put words in my mouth. I'm just saying that that's not how adult conversations work, okay?
How could binary come into existence without an intelligent agent to assign the values to each side of the data set?
DNA can be interpreted as a code.
I don't know, is it literal or figurative?
I believe.
Gallus, I don't know how you put engineer at the second part of your name, because if you, number one, your level of ignorance on this topic is so mind-bending. I do not know how you actually think you're making a remotely coherent separation of these things. There's syntax for what this codon, this triplet of base pairs, equals, does not transform into, is equal to this amino acid. I mean, this is such basic logic. I really don't understand how you're trying to argue this is separate. There are paper after paper. I read several of them this past 2 weeks. So was that all hypothetical, or were they actually doing direct comparison to a code base and its redundancy, its robustness, and its ability to store data?
it seems to me like evolution, naturalistic evolution, has just as good of an explanation as your God did it. I mean, I can't remember everything that you said in that Gish Gallop of,
You just missed my arguments, so back up your claims.
which claims in particular.
How does arbitrary data values get assigned to a recognized code base through random undirected process? As an engineer, explain to me how that's remotely plausible.
Well, I mean, as I said, I've already explained this in this debate that natural processes, natural chemical reactions would have resulted in the configuration that would have been most likely to survive, because it did survive. And so over millions of years and over a lot of trial and error.
So obviously you have never researched abiogenesis, because as of right now, the greatest number of base paired nucleotides they've managed to get to hook together without enzymes is 21. So, and that's in a non-prebiotic environment. They've gotten 21 to bind together. So your entire premise of somehow a syntax that has semantics and pragmatics being able to just over millions of years somehow form itself is not remotely backed up by the quote-unquote natural chemical reactions to which you are referring to.
I don't understand how this is prescriptive to the natural world.
You don't understand that? The point that is being made is that even in a controlled environment, which has exponentially reduced obstructions to the processes that you're referring to actually being executed, they can't do it. On purpose, they can't do it. So you're claiming that through undirected natural process, things that we can't do on purpose somehow happened by accident. Is that your claim?
Thank you for inserting more words into my mouth.
Okay, let me dumb it down for you then. Are you suggesting that something that is not feasible in a lab is more likely to occur in a uncontrolled, violent environment?
Well, can I explain?
I'm letting you talk now.
Oh, are you sure? Never mind. Sorry about that. The way that this doesn't exactly correlate to the discussion of evolution is that God could totally exist. God could have created DNA. God, I mean, for the sake of the argument that we're having right now, that could totally plausibly be a thing. But that goes nowhere to address evolution.
The whole premise of evolution is that somehow the entirely new functions are able to spring into existence through undirected process. And we actually don't observe new data set functions coming into existence.
There are several studies.
No. What they have observed is modifications to existing data. This isn't something new, it's just the acceleration of something that was existing. So you're now looking at existing data being construed as supposed evolution versus it having to already have been there. I mean, are you comprehending what I'm saying here?
Yes, John. I comprehend what you're saying.
Explain it to me then.
What you're failing to understand is how epigenetics plays into evolution, because evolution is the only way to really understand why epigenetics happens.
No, you have to expand. You have to expand on that. You have to expand on that assertion.
Oh, real quick. Let's just let Godless finish.
No, he needs to expand on that assertion.
Yes, John. I comprehend what you're saying.
Explain it to me then.
But It is not a code. It's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's an acid. I don't understand why you think it's a code. DNA is no more of a code than Diet Coke and regular Coke.